Our next presenter is Dr. Osman Gajiko, who is going to take us through trends in agricultural productivity in the Gambia. The floor is yours, Dr. Gajiko.
Thank you, Dr. Jobate. Thank you to colleagues and everyone else who is connected. I hope you can all hear me very well. Good. Yes, so my presentation is on agricultural productivity. I wanted, in choosing my topic of discussion, I wanted, given the time constraint, I wanted to pick on something highly specific so that one can say a lot more concrete things about it, rather than a broad topic where one may not be able to do justice. But even with something as specific as this topic, you can only say so much in a presentation setting. First of all, before we go into the issue of agricultural productivity, let me just point out a few obvious things that I'm sure everybody connected here knows. Nobody has to be told what is the importance of agriculture to the Gambian economy. I just listed, four basic issues here. We know as a sector, it's one of the largest. It's anywhere from a quarter to a third. It's a major source of forex earnings. It's a large employer. At least 50% of people derive their employment directly from it. And it's a significant source of household income for your typical household in the Gambia, anywhere from 60 to 75. Now, these numbers vary quite a bit, but the point being, anytime you are above 50%, there's no question about the significance of this sector to the economy. So this one is like basically preaching to the choir. Everyone, this is not controversial at all with regards to the question of how important agriculture is. So before I go further in terms of providing actual data and discussions, let's just basics. What do I mean by agricultural productivity? At a basic fundamental level, agricultural productivity is basically agricultural output, ratio of output per given input. You can have, so output you can use actually physical quantity in terms of kilograms or metric tons. And then input could be land, labor, or a combination of various ones of those. But again, I cannot use all of the various measures of agricultural productivity. So I'm going to focus on one that is very important for the Gambian context. This is yield. Yield is amount of output. This is in kilograms or tons per land area. And per land area, I'm going to use hectare. A hectare is basically 100 by 100, it's 10,000 square meters is a hectare. Why is agricultural productivity important? Because it means you are efficiently using the limited resources that you have. If your yield goes up, it means for the same given quantity of land, you're able to produce more. Or for the same given quantity, you can use fewer inputs as you increase your yield. So yield is basically output per land. So if I produce about, let's say, 1,000 mangoes for a given hectare, then my yield basically would be, one ton per hectare. So there's a reason, again, why I focus on yield, output per land. I could use output per person, but in the Gambian context, I'm using output per land. I'll come to that in a second, why I'm using that. Now, why is agricultural productivity important? When we are talking about agriculture, for that sector to really contribute to the economy, you must have agricultural productivity growth. Why? So the first bullet point, first and foremost, it is important for food security. We get most of our food consumption from agriculture directly, either directly or indirectly after it is processed. So for farm households, it means increases in their food security. Number two, the same farm households, it also just means their income is going up. And we know income growth is its most important contributor to poverty reduction. Higher supply, we know, means lower prices. So higher increases in agricultural productivity is associated with lower cost of farm agricultural produce, which reduces inflation and reduces the cost of living. In the Gambia, the consumption basket used by GBOS and in many African countries in calculating the inflation rate, about 50% of it is food, is composed of food items. So when you reduce the price of food, the cost of food, you actually have a significant effect of inflation. Increases in agricultural productivity enables farmers to increase the range of activities they produce. They're able to engage in more innovative, risky agricultural activities, which can increase returns. So this leads to a change in a structural change in agriculture. When I talk about structural change in agriculture, I mean farmers moving from subsistence farming towards commercial farming. Increase in productivity also allow the marketing of produce, because why? Because when you have increase in productivity, you're able to produce more than your own consumption need, and you're able to market those surplus. The marketing of those surplus provides an intermediate goods for agro-processing and manufacturing. And this also contributes to structural change in the economy. And what do I mean by structural change in the economy? I mean, basically, we're going from an primary production-based economy to an economy that is a bit more complex, where you have some processing and some movement towards industrialization. And finally, this is finally, by the way, the increase in agricultural productivity is also important because we import a lot of agricultural goods, things that we can grow locally. And by importing these locally, we reduce our import bills, which limits our exposure to outside shocks, which has been a very big contributor to Gambia's inflation, because we've been importing a lot of inflation. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. I'm sure people can think of all sorts of reasons that you can add to these bullet points that shows why agricultural productivity is important for the Gambian economy. So in a nutshell, just kind of putting everything in a graphical format, when you have increased agricultural productivity, sorry, it looks like my formatting got messed up a bit here. Basically, it leads to greater supply of food, easier and greater degree of marketing. This leads to agricultural transformation, which is reflected by diversity in agricultural production and local supply of agricultural intermediate goods. And that agricultural transformation also implies economic transformation. And given that both agriculture and economic and processing are very labor intensive, this transformation of the economy, both of the sector and the one it is linked to, always signifies a significant generation of employment. So it is a form of economic development that is very, very inclusive. So what determines agricultural productivity? Again, for people who follow agricultural economics, this is the basics. You don't even have to be an agricultural economist to have a sense of this or to be a practicing farmer. By the way, I'm happy to know that at least two of the presenters here have farms here. Both Bojang and I have some farms. So, yeah. So we are also talking not only as economists or analysts, but also as practicing farmers. So basically, what are the contributors to agricultural productivity? Basically, access to appropriate inputs. This is seeds, fertilizer, machinery, pesticides, fungicides, you name it. Access to financing could be loans, guarantees. That is for people who are engaging in commercial agriculture. Infrastructure, this could be irrigation, transportation, storage, and if the market is a lot more developed, you can talk about warehousing, supply chain financing. Those things can be added to the second bullet point, and also extension services. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. I'm just focusing on things that are a lot more relevant to our Gambian context. So in this talk, I will give a lot of data about trends and growth in agricultural productivity in the Gambia. Now, of course, we have a lot of we have a lot of crops that are grown in the Gambia. Dozens and dozens of them. But I'm given the time constraint, I'll just focus on three here. So the three that I'm focusing on are rice, millet, and groundnut. So the light green at the top with no marking on it, that is actually rice. Rice, millet. So just to give you an idea of what percentage, rice, that part that is not listed, currently 15% of the arable land in Gambia goes to rice cultivation, 23% goes to millet cultivation, and 9% goes to groundnut cultivation. So those three, they account for 47%, almost half of the total arable land in the Gambia. Groundnut historically used to occupy a lot more of the land. Unfortunately, it has gone down significantly. But if you were to go back to 1990, the share of land in groundnut cultivation was even higher than millet and rice. So I'll be focused on these three, but be rest assured that the focusing of these three is not, it's not, I'm not looking at a very small corner of the market. I'm looking at three crops that really account for about half of the arable land in the Gambia. The total arable land in the Gambia is 440,000 hectares. So also I'll be focusing on yield, but I also want you to know that just because I focus on yield doesn't mean that other measures of agricultural productivity are given a different picture. No. In fact, other measures of agricultural productivity are very, very correlated with yield. So for instance, here on this graph, you have agricultural per capita production index. So this is a productivity that's using per worker. It's the total value of production per worker. We have total agriculture, which is in dotted lines. The green line is the crops, that is the higher one. And the flat, relatively flat one is the livestock. As you can see, basically from 1990 to 2020, over the past 3 decades, the agricultural productivity index per person, which is a measure of yield, a measure of agricultural sector productivity, is basically on a downward trend. So whether you're looking at livestock, whether you're looking at crops, whether you're looking at agriculture as a whole, productivity is actually on a downward trend. There is a lot of year-to-year fluctuation. I'll show you the reason for why we have year-to-year, high rate of fluctuation. But the basic point from this graph, when you look at it, is that there's a downward trend. So why did I focus on yield? Let's look at this picture here. This picture is showing you the population growth, which is being measured from the left axis. Population is the green line. And the arable land in the Gambia, which is being measured from the right axis, which is the dotted one. As you can see, the population of the Gambia has been growing very much from 65, which was at below 500,000. Now we are close to 2.7 million. So Gambia is one of the most densely populated countries in Africa. So when you have a country where you have a small land size and the population is growing very very fast, what is at a premium? What is at a premium is land. Land is at a premium. So to have agricultural productivity, the metric we need to focus on is output per land, because land is at a premium. Now our arable land is currently 450,000. We've basically reached the point where now it's very difficult to increase the arable land in the Gambia without cutting into forests or without shrinking into other crop land, or basically touching into other marginal land that are ill-suited for production. So now with close to 440,000 hectares, we need to find ways of sustainably maximizing output for that land without any hope of increasing it. So this is why I'm focusing on yield, and this is why it's important, if you're looking at agricultural productivity in Gambia, one also focuses on yield. So let's start with groundnut. If you look at groundnut production here, the world average is somewhere around over 1.6 tons per hectare. But Gambia, we are close to the African average, which is close to 1 ton per hectare. But the key part here is not only the difference in levels, of which it is significant between the Gambia and the global average, but the fact that it is really flat. And since 2019, it's actually been going down. So agricultural productivity in the Gambia, in our main cash crop, hasn't experienced any growth. By the way, if I go all the way back to 1970, the picture doesn't change much, but I restricted the range to these last 30 years just so that the graph doesn't look too small on the slides. So to summarize that a bit in terms of graphs, so here is the world average, the African average, and the Gambian average. We are slightly below the African average over the past 10 years. We used to be actually well above the African average a few decades back, but if you go 30 years back, we were above the African average. It's just that things have gotten worse the past couple of years. So let's go to rice. The picture is a bit worse here. The world average is much higher and is going up. Currently, the world average in terms of yield of rice, that's how many tons per hectare, is approaching 5. It's well over 4, and it's actually going up. The African average it looks flat here, but it's going up very, very slightly. The Gambian average is actually going down. To put this, again, you can do these comparisons here. You have the world average around 4.6. That is 4.6 tons per hectare. The African average is 2.3 tons per hectare. The Gambian average is 0.78 tons per hectare. In 1990, just to keep you this, to give a comparison, which I wrote about, in 1990, we had the same average yield as Senegal, which was around 2 tons per hectare. From then, we have been going down steadily. Currently, we are less than 1 ton per hectare, and Senegal is close to the world average of over 4 tons per hectare. Let me just to put this thing in a different perspective. Based on our current yield right now, and given the amount of rice that Gambia consumes, do you know how many hectares Gambia would have to cultivate to feed itself? Given our current productivity, you would have to use 99% of the arable land in the Gambia to produce the total amount of rice we need. So the population of the Gambia is 2.7. Our per capita consumption of rice is about 90 kilograms per person per year, which means the total meal rice that we need to feed the whole country in a year is 243,000 tons. If you convert that to paddy rice, that is rice that is harvested, that's 347,000 metric tons. The land needed, given the yield that we have right now, the land needed to produce that quantity of paddy rice is 99% of our arable land. In other words, we will have to use all the agricultural land that can be cultivated to feed the country, which is impossible because you cannot grow anything else. But if we have the same yield of Senegal, you will need only 20% of Gambia's arable land to feed Gambia with rice. If you have the world average, you'll use less than the land that we are currently using. With the level of yield that the world is experiencing, you will need half of the land that we are using for rice cultivation to feed the whole of Gambia. Just to put that in perspective. Millet here is one of the most important cereal that we produce. Again, the story is similar. We used to have our yield productivity in millet. I'm sorry, again, my legends have been a bit compressed by the screen, but Gambia is the dotted line. So you can see, the world trend, the production, the yield growth for the world is going up. For Africa, it's mostly flat. For the Gambia, it's been going down. So if you go to the next slide here, this is clearer. You will see the Gambia, we have 0.7 tons per hectare. Now, this one actually makes situation look better than it is, because if you go back, you notice that we are getting, things are getting worse over time. So if I do this summary for the next 10 years, it's going to look really bad. Maize, again, is this similar story. The world yield is way above. African yield is is lower than the world, but we are way below the African yield. So if you look at the comparison here, around the world, the yield for maize is over 5 tons per hectare. In Africa, the average is 2 tons per hectare. In Gambia, it's less than 1 ton per hectare. This is, so the maize picture is very similar to the rice picture. And this is very important because when it comes to livestock, which is an important part of agriculture, the biggest important cereal for livestock feed is maize, whether it's poultry, whether it's small ruminants, whether it's aquaculture. The biggest ingredient for their feed is maize. So if you have this low level of yield for maize, it doesn't mean only the crops are having productivity, poor productivity. It means even your poultry market, your poultry industry, small ruminants, aquaculture, they cannot thrive. All these subsectors in agriculture are interlinked and positively correlated when it comes to growth. So what determines agricultural productivity? So I mentioned what are the things that go in. So I'm just repeating the graph that the slide that I showed earlier. So I talked about inputs, access to finance, infrastructure, extension services. I will not go into all of this in detail. I'll focus on a few of them. So before we go here, let's talk about the role of government here. Government here sets strategy in the sector, all sectors, but in this particular case, in the agricultural sector. They prioritize public expenditure in the sector to the extent that the sector is very important for the economy, determines the level of expenditure on an annual basis. Among those, is their development budget, not only the recurrent budget. And also to the extent that there are market failures, it is the role of the government, the public sector, to address those market failures, because market failures cannot be adequately addressed by the private sector or individuals because they cannot internalize the externalities.
We have 5 minutes to go, Doctor.
Thank you. So you can look at in the Gambia. So this is the budget allocation from 2023. It doesn't look very different from 2022 to 2021. The share of agriculture is pretty much roughly the same. Basically, which is around 8%. In past 5 years, I would say it averages around 7 to 8%. Now I'll leave that to you to determine, how that is ranked or how that should be ranked relative to other sectors. Now, irrigation. Let's talk about the government's investment in irrigation. Well, it's difficult to find a picture, so I went into detailed government breakdown. Budget expenditure breakdown, and fortunately this might be small for most of you to see, but the part I highlighted, it's called the construction of irrigation infrastructure and land development. This is the expenditure budget item, recurrent and development budget that was submitted by the Ministry of Finance. You can see 0 for 2020. The estimate, again, for 2022, well, they put 1,000 here, but it would have been important to see this figure for 2023 to see that what was projected, whether that was actually spent. I believe it's actually 0. It turns out just like 2020 and 2021. So irrigation infrastructure investment in the Gambia by the public sector is almost non-existent. In terms of the share of land that is equipped for irrigation in the Gambia, we are currently about 2%, which is less than the African average. So why is irrigation very important? If you look at Gambian agricultural productivity, crop production index from 1970 to the present, you see a lot of fluctuation. When you graph that against rainfall, so rainfall is the dotted line and the solid line is crop productivity, you see a very high correlated co-movement. Basically, agricultural output in the Gambia, if you were to look at a prediction here, rainfall would be a very, very high predictive variable, which basically tells you that there is no significant irrigation in the country. It's a rainfall-dependent agriculture. Fertilizer use is very, very low in Gambia relative to not only to the global average, but to our African peers. The kilograms per hectare per arable land used in the Gambia in terms of fertilizer is 3%. The African average is 3 kilograms. The African average is 18 kilograms, and the world average is over 100 kilograms. Of course, there are places in the world that are using too much fertilizer. Gambia is very far from that. We are using too little. So current picture, given that we're running out of time, basically is agricultural productivity. We know what are the determinants of it, but looking at these determinants, we know we have low fertilizer use, we have low mechanization, so I didn't provide the data on that because of time constraints. We have inadequate government support, which is exemplified by this low level of irrigation investment. And we basically have limited irrigation, which so without agricultural productivity, this is a situation we are first faced with. Agricultural sector will remain largely in a state of subsistence. There'll be little agro-processing and therefore no significant industrialization and therefore no structural change in the economy. There will be continued dependence on imports. There will be continued exposure to external shocks, increasing growth in the volume of imports of food and consumer goods, and there will be persistent income stagnation and poverty. Thank you.
Dr. Gajiko, for that brilliant presentation on agricultural productivity in the Gambia. We learned a lot. Indeed, you've really delved into the sector and bring out what we need to see. I think the government needs to see this presentation to know the veracity of the need to invest in the agricultural sector. You talked about the need for agricultural productivity to ensure that there is food security and reduce poverty, and that we're able to reduce cost of living, prices will come down, and other reasons. But what I like about the presentation is the same storyline when it comes to groundnut, millet, as well as rice. For all of these, we seem to be doing better relatively to Africa some 20, 30 years ago than we're doing now. And our averages are usually below the African average. And while the others are improving, we tend to be, productivity tends to be declining in the Gambia. And this is indeed a cause for concern. And when we look at the determinants of productivity, which is not stranger to most of us, access to finance, some of the issues, and government expenditure in the agricultural sector are some of the issues that we still will struggle with. So thank you for that presentation. We want to ask just a few questions along the line of the presentation that you have done. For example, we want to on agricultural productivity, we know that Gambia was on the world map for our success in groundnut production, but the challenges of mechanization and climate change have dragged our progress. For example, we talked about how rainfall is a key determinant of productivity in our agricultural sector, of production in our agricultural sector, not productivity. What should be Gambia's approach to agriculture? For large commercial farmers, what do you think the country needs to do? Do we have a wide range of small commercial farmers, or we have what large commercial farms? What is the approach that you think would work for the Gambia? One, as an expert, as an economist. Two, as a practitioner in this space. What are your thoughts on this?
No, thank you, Dr. Jobati. That's a good question. I mean, the answer I'm going to give here would be nothing new to anyone here who's connected, or certainly not to anyone in government. The first thing one has to realize, first you have to appreciate the problem we have, like understand where we are as a country in the agricultural sector. How are we doing relative to what is actually possible? First and foremost is there has to be an appreciation of the fact that where we are when it comes to agriculture is a situation of crisis. When you are in a situation of crisis, how you address that problem is very different from when you are in an everyday, mundane issue. If you have a headache, you don't approach it in the same way as an ailment that requires immediate surgery. So the sense of, number one, there has to be a sense of urgency, and that sense of urgency has to be driven by these pictures. I mean, the figures that some of the figures I showed here, by no means are those exhaustive anyway. There's a lot of other evidence, and all of this evidence is accessible and available to policymakers. There has to be an appreciation of the fact that this sector is important. Do people agree or not? Is it important? Yes. How are we doing currently? Is it good or bad? I hope they say it is bad, but there are different degrees of how bad it is. And it's not just something is as bad as other sectors. It is bad in a way that is very critical, that approaches a crisis situation. And in a crisis situation, the question is, whatever you need to do is something you should have done yesterday. You don't move and act as if it is a mundane or a perennial issue. Given that we know that it is the structure of our economy and the way people are, and the way everything interlinked, that it is this sector that has the best shot at moving Gambia out of poverty, moving us towards industrialization, moving us towards structural change. The number one is on an annual basis, there should be a complete reorganization of how much we allocate to the agricultural sector. Number one. Number two, within that agricultural or sector budget, how much is allocated to recurrent versus development budget? This is also needs to be reflected. Then government needs to have basically the sort of investments that address these determinants in terms of infrastructure, in terms of access to input, in terms of access to finance. But right now, we don't have any of those. When you hear government actions, it's basically in relation to projects that are coming from international organizations. And as somebody who has worked in some of these institutions, who has worked on these projects, I can guarantee you none of these projects will lead to development in the Gambia. They are not designed to do that. So the first thing is recognition that we are in a crisis period. And when somebody recognizes, a policymaker recognizes that you are in a crisis in a particular sector, the sort of response you get is not just a minor laundry list. You see that through the sense of purpose and the urgency of actions. So, but at the very least, to do justice to your question that you asked, the infrastructure is very important. Right now, not only are we not investing in infrastructure, there's a dilapidation. Let me give you a specific example. The ADP funded the Jahali Partial Rice Project, which used to produce rice, both rainy season and dry season. Currently, go to Jahali. In the rainy season right now, you will not find a single rice production right now as we speak in the village of Jahali, because the dike system, the irrigation system have not been maintained. They can only grow rice in the dry season, because in the rainy season, the water level is too high, and the means of pumping it got destroyed long time ago. They were never repaired. So in Jahali Partial Project, which used to be our flagship rice production area, there is no rice production in the rainy season, not this year, not in the past couple of years. So that's to give you a flavor of the problem that we have in this sector.
Farms are doing a good job. So I was impressed. But I know when it comes to accessing finance to invest in the real sectors of the economy, including in agricultural production, as a practitioner in the sector, because when you look at our loans, the loans profile, distribution of trade, and you're getting back their money. But then once they invest into production, once they invest into the agriculture sector, into industries, you find that it has a greater impact on the economy. What would you suggest at the policy level for government to tackle this inequalities when it comes to the direction of finances to sectors that are not really the productive base of the economy? What would you suggest for government?
Thank you, Dr. Jovate. That's a very important point, because access to finance is important for efficient operation of any businesses, and it's just as true in agriculture. And what you will find that this is not only in Gambia, but in almost any African country, the amount of credit that is going to that sector is very low. Now, of course, there's a good explanation for this, because the sector there's high perception of risk. It's not only perceived, there's a real risk, as opposed to, like, let's say a retail sector where, you know, the cash conversion cycle is very high. You know, you buy goods, you know, within a few months, you can really exhaust all of them. You repay your creditors and take care of all other sort of expenses. Agriculture, when it comes to seasonal things, you need, you know, several months if you are lucky for a cereal. For trees, it could actually be, you have to, you know, plant them. For instance, I do horticulture. I have a lot of fruit trees there. Some of these things will take 4 to 5 years before they mature. So you have a negative cash flow over an extended period of time. So during that time, you know, it's difficult for you to service your debt when your cash flow is negative. So you have to look at the agricultural sector is similar in some ways to infrastructure and manufacturing, in the sense that long-term finance is essential. And when you have long-term finance, you have to look at what is your financial intermediary sector is. Are the banking sector providing finance? And what you'll find is that the banking sector is very little finance is going into agriculture, because number one, the share of the liabilities of most commercial banks in the Gambia, and for that matter in Africa, is very, it's mainly short-term. So a bank that has a very high percentage of its liabilities being short-term, it finds it very difficult to give long-term loans. So when at ADB, we have many projects, for instance, that try to provide, you know, long-term capital, so that to enable many commercial banks to give long-term loans to sectors like agriculture, manufacturing, and infrastructure, for instance. At the country level, the government also needs to find out what they can do to reduce the risk perception in agriculture. Now, most commercial banks, you're not going to force them to go and lend in agriculture in this day and age. There are other policy initiatives that can be done. You know, this can be at the level of cooperatives. This can be guarantees where you reduce the risk profile of a particular target or group of farmers that the government has decided need financing. And if you have some sort of a guarantee scheme, this could be done maybe exclusively by the government or in collaboration with various international or multilateral organizations. You have, you know, one of those recently created is called GuarantCo, where they would guarantee, you know, high risk assets of particular sectors, whether they are, you know, gender, whether there's high concentration of poor women, or whether they're in rural areas or farming. You can entice commercial banks to lend to a particular sector by having some sort of a guarantee schemes. These are just one examples. I mean, there are, when the will is there, there are several, when the will, not only the will, but the ability to execute and implement the plan, when those are there are several policy initiatives that can be implemented to address these aspects to the difficulty of accessing finance in agriculture. I mean, I can tell you as a practitioner, I approached 2 local banks about getting a loan to a farm that is already now producing, but they asked for a collateral that cannot be agricultural land or agricultural machinery. It has to be a compound in the combos. It cannot be just any compound. It has to be a compound in the combos. If I can provide that, they will provide me a loan that, you know, I can use in my farm. As you can see, that rules out pretty much 99% of the farmers. Yeah, so basically that just gives you an idea. And of course, at a very high interest rate, when I asked what the interest rate would be, they told me, oh, you are a very prime customer. We will give you very high interest, very good interest rate. I said, oh, how good will it be? And the number I got quoted was from 2 banks was between 19% and 21% per year. That is not sustainable for an agricultural financing. And when I asked for a grace period, I said, how long of a grace period will I get? They said, well, we can negotiate. Maybe you can have 1 to 2 months of grace period, 2 months maximum. So again, as you can see, the existing terms of the commercial banks that we have is not suited to addressing the problem of access to finance in agriculture. The government needs to do something really significant, serious. You cannot force the commercial banks. That's not compatible with the sort of economy you want to build. You have to change the incentive structure for them to reduce the risk perception enable them, to feel comfortable. But it's not impossible. It is very, very possible because other countries have done it. We have seen it. Thank you.
So much. I think this discussion can be taken further. The way our finance infrastructure or architecture is not helping the real sector is something that is concerning, and I think government needs to look into this, either try to de-risk small-scale producers, whether in the agriculture sector or in the industries, or through some, for example, credit bureaus to be looked into. Anyway, it has been a brilliant presentation from Mr. Lamin Bojang, Mr. Makita Bujame, and Dr. Usman Gajiko on this conversation on Gambia's economy. And I've learned a lot as a moderator, and I thank all of you and Ms. Adama Ture for her introduction of the panelists, and for example, and Binta Sise, who is behind the scenes trying to help us ensure that we have a good discussion here. I thank you all, and we ask Mr. Lamin Bojang to give a farewell address before we close this webinar. Bojang?
Oh, thank you very much. I want to thank my co-presenters for a very good presentation, but also to thank the group of panelists for a very good moderation session. I just want to add a few things on agriculture as a practicing farmer, as my brother alluded to. I think private sector participation is very important in the agricultural sector. Outgrower schemes are also very important areas that should be encouraged. Development and empowerment of cooperatives. As you know, cooperatives are associations set by people who are in the same line of business with the aim of promoting their own agenda. So cooperatives are very important. Then also support to mechanization for small-scale farmers. On exchange rate, yes, I think I definitely agree with Mr. Jame Kitabu on his proposals, which is very important. In addition, maybe I would like to add, promote the use of domestic currency in exchange. Sometimes it's funny that some of our rents, even in the Gambia, are charged in US dollars. So this is definitely a challenge. Improve ease of doing business. That's also very important in order to, promote local industrial growth, but also attract larger foreign investors who can definitely come in. So the other issue is on the regulation part. Kitabu spoke about a lot of foreign exchange bureaus. So the licensing requirement, yes, I agree to that, but also there are a lot of export of foreign currencies in boxes. Somebody was definitely telling me, and it's mind-boggling in a country like Gambia when you have a lot of cash that is not going through the banking system. So you tend to have a lot of leakages, which is a serious concern as far as I am concerned. On insurance, yes, it's very, okay, I will stop there for the sake of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bojan, and Salam and Jaju to give us a closing remark. Mr. Jaju. Adama Ture, can you give us a
yes
closing remark?
Yes.
And
Yes. So that was really an interesting presentation from the panelists, and then a great discussion. Personally, I have learned a lot from it, and I hope that the audience did. And as a result, I would like to take this opportunity to thank first the panelists for sparing us with their valuable time to actually present, to share their knowledge with us in their respective fields. We would also like to thank the moderator, Dr. Jobate, for that amazing job. And then we would like to thank the Gambia Center for Research and Policy Studies for organizing such events that are valueless, and meaning that they're actually very valuable. You can attach price to that, and this is really appreciated. And to the audience, thank you so much for being with us and for being patient. And we also apologize for those breaks we had in terms of network and all that. So we really apologize for that. And then thank you so much for being with us throughout this entire session. Thank you very much.